A royal birth was supposed to bring joy. Trumpets had been prepared. Midwives stood ready, but what arrived that night left the entire court frozen in fear. That whispers filled the palace halls. Was it a punishment, a curse, or something far worse? This isn't folklore, that it's a real moment buried in royal history, where the arrival of one newborn shattered centuries of pride and tradition that, if strange, forgotten truths of royalty fascinate you. Subscribe now and stay till the end, because this royal secret was never meant to survive the night. The castle was cloaked in silence that evening. The torches flickered along stone corridors, casting long shadows on anxious faces. Inside the queen's chamber, tension was thick. The court's most trusted midwives, physicians, and noble ladies waited for the moment every kingdom dreams of: a royal heir's first cry. Outside, a chapel bell stood ready to ring, signaling joy to the people. But inside, the queen screamed louder than expected, and then a long, suffocating pause. No laughter. No cheer, only gasps that the child had arrived. But something was very wrong. The queen lay motionless, drenched in sweat, eyes fixed on the faces around her, but none of them would meet her gaze. That not even the king. At the midwife, pale as the sheets, held the newborn in trembling hands. That she tried to speak, but her lips couldn't move. The child's body was small, frail, yet not lifeless. That breathed. It moved, but its form defied every expectation. To one nurse sobbed quietly that a priest in the corner crossed himself without a word. This wasn't the heir the court had prepared for. This was something they didn't have words for. Outside the chamber, the bell remained silent. Inside, the crown had inherited a storm it never saw coming. When the king finally stepped forward, his boots echoed across the stone floor. Each step slower than the last, he reached the cradle and stared down at the child meant to carry his name. Silenced, his jaw clenched at his hands, usually steady in battle, began to tremble. This wasn't just a son or daughter. This was a challenge to the divine order. A child born with visible deformities, limbs twisted, features unfamiliar. The king turned to his advisors, his voice low but cold. Who else knows? It wasn't sorrow in his voice. It was feared, because in a royal court, appearances weren't just vanity. They were power, legitimacy, and survival. And this child, innocent as it was, had just shaken the foundations of his throne. To be why dawn, the queen was asleep, sedated with herbs. But behind the heavy oak doors of the royal council chamber, voices clashed like swords. What if the people see it? One advisor hissed. We'll be mocked, challenged. They'll say the dynasty is cursed. Another argued for compassion. It's the king's blood, a child still. But mercy was scarce in courts ruled by image and legacy. A physician proposed hiding the truth, sending the child to a distant monastery. That a general more ruthless suggested something darker. No heir is better than A broken one. The king stood silent at the center of it all, that his face was stone. But his silence was louder than any verdict. By nightfall, the cradle was gone at the celebration can led, the birth erased from royal record, that only a few would ever know what truly came into the world that night. The courters were told the child had not survived a tragic stillbirth. Whispers of divine mystery and the queen's failing health. Black drapes were hung on palace windows. The kingdom mourned a royal heir they would never meet. A child they were told had never taken a breath. But the truth was quietly loaded into a carriage. Before sunrise, wrapped not in gold thread cloth, but plain linen. No escort, no procession, just two silent guards and a monk who dared not look back. They traveled deep into the countryside, beyond the reach of nobility, beyond memory, the monastery they arrived at had no name, and those who lived there asked no questions. Within its cold stone walls, the child was handed over. And just like that, the blood of a dynasty disappeared into Shadow Point. 3 days passed before the queen regained full consciousness as she awoke to a room of flowers, soft voices, and a nursemaid whispering prayers. But something was missing. She reached instinctively for a cradle and found only empty silence. "Where is my child?" she asked. Her voice the ladies in waiting exchanged nervous glances. A physician stepped forward with rehearsed sorrowed. "Deeply sorry, Your Majesty. The child was lost. A stillbirth." She blinked once, twice, but tears didn't come. That somewhere deep inside she knew they were lying. She remembered the cries. She remembered the midwife's face. But in the court of kings, even a mother's memory could be overridden. That she stared at the ceiling, hands clenched around the bed linen, and whispered the name she'd chosen for her child. It would never be spoken again. While the palace wore the mask of mourning, a few servants whispered the truth behind locked doors. That a maid claimed she heard the baby cry. A guard swore he saw a carriage leave before dawn, and the midwife, she vanished that same night. That some believed the child had been hidden, that others said the baby was born with a mark, a twisted hand, a misshapen eye, or a strange growth. Signs they claimed of a cursed bloodline or divine punishment. Yet the whispers grew like mold in the palace walls. And with each passing day, the queen became more isolated, more silent. She no longer trusted those who brought her food as she stared out windows for hours, lips moving in prayer. If they said she sometimes whispered to someone who wasn't there to a lullaby, only a mother would sing that. Because somewhere in her heart, she believed her child was still alive. Far from the court's marble floors and velvet thrones, a young boy grew among stone walls and silenced. He was never told his name, and only that he was a gift from heaven, left on monastery steps by fate. But even at 5 years old, he knew he was different. He limped when he walked. One arm hung strangely halls and voices calling his name. Sometimes he saw a woman in his sleep. Her face hidden, but her lullaby familiar. He would wake crying, clutching at his chest. Though he did not know why, the boy was never told he was a prince. But in the way he stood, tall despite his pain, in the quiet strength of his silence, royal blood still pulsed through his veins back at the palace. Years had passed, the queen, now older and thinner, walked the halls like a ghost. Then one morning, deep within a forgotten storage room, a servant discovered a hidden canvas, a painting half-finish, its edges smeared. But unmistakably it was a portrait of a newborn child. The eyes were the queen's. The lips, unmistakably royal, but shaking. The servant brought it to her chamber. She froze. Her hand trembled as she traced the face. This was never commissioned. She whispered, no one was allowed. Her voice cracked. It was proof painted before the lie was sealed. The proof that the child had lived that. The court dismissed it as an old, discarded studied. But the queen locked the portrait away along with the last pieces of her sanity. Because from that moment on, she stopped speaking to her quarters and started speaking only to the painting point. One stormy night, the queen disappeared from her chambers. Of guards searched the palace, the grounds, the gardens, nothing until a trail of wet footprints led down to the old chapel crypt. There beneath the altar, a hidden stone door was found ajar, its hinges rusted, but disturbed. They descended into the cold silence of the royal tombs. Torches flickering against walls carved with names and crowns at the far end on a slab meant for a long-dead ancestor. They found her kneeling beside a sealed iron box that she was whispering to it, smiling to, calling it my son. When they approached, she turned slowly. I had them hide him here, she said, so he wouldn't be mocked. There was no child inside the box, only a faded cloth, a lock of hair, and a tiny crown no one had ever seen before. The guards led her away gently. But in her mind, she had finally tucked her baby in for the night. Hundreds of miles away, the boy had grown into a teenager, still quiet, still limping. But sharper now, asking questions the monks couldn't answer. That one cold morning, an old monk pulled him aside. You must leave, he said, voice trembling. They'll come for you soon. The boy was confused. Why? The monk sighed. Reaching into his robes, he handed the boy a medallion, golden, shaped like a lion, holding a lily. This was on your neck the day you arrived. I wasn't supposed to keep it. The moment the boy touched it, something changed. His eyes welled up. His chest tightened. As if a part of him had been waiting for it. That night before dawn, the monk helped him escape Drew. The trees, past silent bells, and forgotten graves, the boy didn't know where he was going. But for the first time in his life, he knew. He had come from somewhere. News of a mysterious young man traveling north reached the capital. He was said to bear a strange resemblance to someone long erased from history. Whispers spread like fire through wine halls and servant quarters. Did the queen truly lose her child or hide him? Old nurses who had served during the birth years trembled. In private, one was found mumbling. He had her eyes. He cried like a king. The royal council panicked that a secret decree was issued. If anyone shelters the boy, they commit treason. But it was too late. That the people had found a symbol in him. Thought not just a forgotten prince, but a ghost of justice. The graffiti began to appear on alley walls. The crown returns. Blood remembers. And in the palace, the queen began preparing a room that had once been sealed, a nursery. The boy now nearly a man stood before the gates of the old city. That he wore no armor, carried no sword, only the medallion around his neck, and the look of someone who had walked through every kind of silence. That the guards who stopped him hesitated at something in his face, his jaw, his stare felt hauntingly familiar. As if they were staring at a painting that once hung in the royal hall. Now living. That a noble woman who had known the queen in her youth stepped forward. At her eyes welled with tears that she knelt whispering, "Your Majesty." He didn't speak, he didn't nod, but the silence confirmed what words never could do. That evening quarters debated in panic that was he a fraud, a threat, or the very son they had helped erase. One minister said, "If he sits on that throne, every lie we've built collapses." But in the shadows of the court the people whispered, "Let it fall." Alone in her chamber, the queen sat beside a single flickering candle. The years had passed since that stormy night. But in her dreams, she still heard the child's cry echoing through stone corridors. A servant entered, trembling. "There's someone asking to see you." The queen turned slowly. "What does he look like?" The servant paused. "Like your husband and a little like you." Her breath caught in her throat as she rose, steadying herself against the table. And for a moment she saw it again. The empty cradle, the blood on the midwife's hands. The lies whispered into her ears. As the door creaked open, the boy stepped in, now grown, quiet, with eyes too old for his age. Neither of them spoke. The candle light danced between them. Then she took off her ring, the one given to her on her coronation day, and placed it in his palm. "I couldn't save you," she whispered. "But maybe you'll save us." At sunrise, the great hall filled with breathless silence. The boy, once forgotten, once hidden, stood where generations of kings had been crowned. At his clothes were simple, his hands slightly shaken, but his gaze steady as steel. The archbishop hesitated, crown in hand at the nobles. Looked to the queen as she nodded once. Barely. And so, with trembling fingers, the crown was placed upon his head. Outside the palace, the people roared not because they saw a monarch, but because they saw a truth resurrected. In that moment, the throne was no longer just a seat of power. It became a symbol of memory, of blood denied, now restored. The boy king spoke only 6 words. "I was buried, but